Don't say cunt. Cunt! How to start your not a podcast. Drop an instant C-bomb. Hello, I'm Haywood, and I recently put out a video with 7 top tips to help you become a good fiction writer. And the videos have got good traction, and that's all very good, and there's lots of people engaging on them and talking about them, which is what it was intended to do, because there's no rules about writing. This was just 7 tips that I find help me, and I thought they might help you. But there's been a few questions about them, so I thought I would do if you might hear some noises, that's Deli's right just down there. She's having a big bum scratch at the moment. Oh no, it's a chin scratch, not a bum scratch. So, and I thought it might help answer a few of those questions in a bit more detail, because there's been a few questions about that, the points that I raised. So the points I raised were, I'll try and remind myself to put them on the screen now so you can see them. So number 1 was read as many books as you can. That's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? If you want to be a good writer, you've got to read as many books as you can. You'd be like 1,000. It's got to be like 1,000 books. I'm not suggesting for one second that you go right now and read 1,000 books. I'm so sorry. I get proper OCD about this. There we go. Yeah, don't go and just rush now and buy 1,000 books and read them. I mean, over the course of your lifetime, you think about all the books you've ever read over your lifetime. That's all training for writing a book. So, but when you want to be a writer, you've got to read. You've got to read. Some people will be able to just write books and never read. I know one guy that refused to read and wrote a book, and it did okay, but that's a rarity. You've got to read. And so that was number 1, read as many books as possible. And that's over the course of your lifetime. And then when you become a writer, you'll start reading books differently. You'll start reading them in a much deeper level. How they structure the story, how they do the characterizations, how they form the dialogue, the narrative, the prose. You'll just, all of a sudden, once you've become a writer, you'll read books and go, wow, okay, this opens you up to a whole new level. It's like seeing behind the computer to the software system, and then suddenly you can understand how that's done. And that's, as a writer, when I read a very good book, I'm equal parts in awe and insanely jealous. And I think all writers probably get like that over other people's incredible work. But that's a good thing, because then that drives you, and you think, well, how did that writer get that book to be so good? Sometimes it's just the planets align and that happens. Second top tip was, don't rely on chain stores. So I said, don't just walk into Waterstones, WH Smith, or any chain bookstore and read the books on the shiny plinths and think that that's good experience. Because it can be, but it can't be, and I'll explain that in a little bit more detail. So the books that you see on the plinths and Waterstones are booked up by the publishers, nearly always by the 5 big publishers. I'm not even going to try and remember to name right now. Penguin, all those people, Simon and Schuster. They'll block book shiny plinths. When you walk into any big bookstore, especially chain bookstore, the books that are presented to you as you walk in, those spaces are paid for by, and booked and paid for and rented or whatever by the publishers way in advance. So you're walking and you're thinking, well, this book must be good because it's right here in front of me. But that's not necessarily the case. It could just be that it's the name of the author. So when you walk in, you're going to get all the top name authors, Stephen King, Simon Scarrow, whoever that are there. And you're going to be thinking, well, they must be the best books there are because they're right in front of me at the front and centre. It's not always about that. It's because those authors have built up massive audiences. Those authors have marketable brands, I guess. It is, isn't it? It's brands. They have marketable brands. So no matter what they put out, the publisher's going to know that they can book those plinth spaces, those premier eyeline bookshelf space when you first walk into the bookshops, and all the brand name books are going to be there. And to be honest with you, the content is on the last of anyone's list. No one gives a shit about the content, which is just so heartbreakingly sad, I think. No one gives a toss about what's going on in the story. All they care about is got a good cover, the name of the writer, and then it's got a snappy title. That's about it. And I just think that's heartbreaking. And then when you get into those stories, especially when they're coming out from the top publishers, the editing standards are so ubiquitous now. It seems to be all the. This is going to sound like I'm attacking editors, and I'm not, because a good editor is worth their weight in gold. A good structural editor is worth their weight in gold. And if my editor Ian ever watches this, I love him to pieces. He's just an amazing person. But editors at the moment, especially London and New York based editors, they seem to go to the same editing school, and they're all learning to do things in exactly the same way. So when they're editing structural editors, when structural editors are reading books, and even down to copy line editors, the people that look after the paragraphs, the flows, the continuity, the technical aspects of writing, they all seem to want exactly the same thing. They want equal chapter lengths. They want the same level of storytelling. They don't want certain jokes. They don't want certain words. I've been picked up in my books recently for referring to a woman that was raped. Can't say rape. It's triggering. Well, what do I say then? I was told I had to say she had been assaulted. And I go, well, I'm a police officer. I was in the police for 22 years. Assault is a general term. Assault could mean all the way from attempted murder to GBH with intent to GBH to ABH to common assault. It can mean many, 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 many different things. But then it can also mean sexual assault. So just saying the word assault is such a broad term. If I walk over and push someone, that's assault. If I stab someone, that's assault. That doesn't define what the action is. By saying rape, as much as it's a horrible thing to do, we instantly know what a horrible, traumatic, terribly disgusting thing that this poor person went through. No, it's triggering. You can't use that word. Put assault in. And that's what they're coming down to. So the editors have been told sensitivity, don't say jokes, don't say bad things, don't trigger anybody. And then what happens is the books get stripped and stripped and stripped and stripped and stripped all the way through it, and they're getting over-edited, over-sanitized. And I'm not suggesting for 1 second that we all need to start putting in our books the most disgusting, outrageous, terrible things we can just for shock value. No. But we have to expose real life. We have to talk about real life. And in my book, Delia, that discusses things like racism and sexual trafficking and misogyny and genocide and all those terrible things that happen, the publishers and the editors were in fits over it. They started off going, yeah, this is a brilliant book. We love it. We love the dark nature of it. We love the raw honesty of it. By the end of it, they wanted to strip everything out. And I had to fight tooth and nail for nearly every single scene to keep that in. Otherwise, you're not talking about anything. It becomes bland. It becomes boring. And it got to the point where as writers that are trying to present material that is realistic, you get to the point going, I'm at risk here of writing a book that I wouldn't read. I would pick this up and go, this is bland and boring. I wouldn't read this. But you're fighting against a lot of strong editing teams that want to strip it out as much as possible, so there's no risk of upsetting anyone on Twitter. There's no risk of cancel culture. There's no risk of woke fury. And being woke is a good thing. That means where we have greater awareness to issues, to cultural sensitivities. That's a very, very good thing. I'm not suggesting for a second that it's not, but it doesn't mean that we have to act in absolute cowardice over every subject that we write. That's what I mean. When you walk into Waterstones, when you walk into Smiths, when you look at those shiny plinths, the bookshelves that are right there, all around you, those are all being paid for by the publishers in advance. The kind of books that you're going to get there are the ones that they know are safe, that are marketable, with brand name authors that they can pump out again and again, that is going to be non-offensive, not controversial, it's not going to upset anybody. You pick it up and they're fucking dull. And I went through periods where I was reading them again and again and again, going, this is shit. And I genuinely mean it. You could walk in, especially with crime thrillers, every DS, every DI, forensic pathologist, it's in every bloody Cornish village, Scottish village, Welsh village, Northumberland. You go, fucking what? These are just dull. They're tepid, they're boring. And I just don't get it. It's like reality TV. I don't know why. I don't find it exciting. I don't find it enticing. There's nothing in it. So that's what I'm saying. If you want to be a good fiction writer, don't read shit like that. It's as blunt as that. And it's as offensive. And that may be offensive. And that may be a little bit controversial. And that might irritate a few people. Because you might have to think, well, in order for me to get on that plinth in that bookshop, I have to jump through those hoops and have my book sanitized to that level to do that. Go ahead, dude. Fill your boots. If that's what you want to do, go for it. Be bland, be boring. Have your heart and soul stripped out of you and write that boring ass book and put it out there. You're not going to get a fulfillment from it. I don't think you're going to get fulfillment from it. You might get some decent money, but that in order for that publisher to keep banking on you again and again, you've got to keep repeating again and again and again. And I'd rather stay at the level I am now as a successful indie author, which is still way below the successes of the big mainstream authors, I'd rather stay where I am, knowing that the content I'm putting out is creatively interesting and invoking and realistic, than that bland and tepid shit. Wow, that was a rant. Let me have a little sip of my tea after that. So that was point 2. Point 3 was read everything. And that, again, that's self-explanatory. I think I said in that video, read westerns, read... The weather's sounding really bad outside. Read westerns, read erotica, read horror, science fiction, fantasy. The reason for that is different genres have different writing styles. So, for instance, you're going to pick up a sword and sandals fantasy, and then you're going to pick up a cyberpunk detective noir. They're going to read differently. The authors have gone into those with 2 different, very defined styles, and by reading as many different cross sections of books as you can, you're learning different skills of writing techniques, and they will pay dividends later when you're developing your characters and your stories and your books. You're going to be thinking, it'd be nice to kind of slip into a bit of a noir feel for this section of this story. And I've got those skills because I've read detective noir stories. Or I might, you know what, I fancy a bit of florid language, a bit of Mills and Boons, you know. And there might be times when you want to do it tongue-in-cheek or even seriously. But if you haven't got the skills to do it, how are you going to do it? So that's what I say about read widely. Read as many genres as you can. And then I don't know. Number 4 was look at those books, what they did well, what they didn't do well. That's self-explanatory as well. You're self-teaching. You learn. I said at the very beginning, when you start becoming a writer and you start looking at the much deeper level of reading books, you become aware of prose, pacing, and all those kind of things. And when you go into a book and you're going, how did you do it? What did you do that was so good? What, in comparison to what maybe I'm writing that isn't so good? How do I get better? How did you do it? So that's good. Number 5, be bold. And what I mean by that is I don't mean scale always. You haven't got to go and give a detailed account of the Battle of Waterloo with 100,000 soldiers, each one of them named on a horse with a sword. Sword's got a name. Let's go charge and fight. I don't mean that. That's scale. That's big. You don't have to do that. Even a small story can be bold. I'm thinking straight away. The Road. Was it Road or The Road? I think it was The Road. Cormac McCarthy. The Road. Big story. Small scale. Was it 2 principal characters, the father and son? It's big. You read that, that's big. That's big. It's because it's a big feeling it invokes, and it's big emotions that it ranges through, and it just feels big, but it's small because it's 2 characters in transit. So that's what I mean by tell a big story. Don't be afraid to have emotional range. Don't be afraid to explore emotional reactions. Be careful not to drown your story in overly emotional reactions, because that can get a bit tiresome. But likewise, you can have one character doing one thing, and you think that's a small story. It can be very big, very, very big, very, very, very big. Look at The Life of Pi. I mean, look at the sheer scale of that story in terms of the emotional journey we go on when we read it. That's huge. But look at it, you might think, well, there's only a few characters in that, so really it could be quite a small story. That's what I mean about be bold and tell a big story. The original, then the number 6 was about using original dialects and voices. Again, I get this all the time. I'm from Birmingham, so I tend to say grass, glass, bath. Some people down the south say grass, glass, bath. That's hard to do to show in dialect in books, but there are ways that you can show dialects. You can clip sentences, and it's important to do that. I've noticed this with editors, particularly at the latter stages of a book being edited, when you're down into the proofreading. Editors are hooked on grammar. They love perfection. So when they see a sentence that is imperfect, they have a compulsion to fix it, even if it's dialogue. Now, I write my dialogue phonetically. I write my dialogue so I want the reader how I want the reader to read it. So I've got a character called Momo in The Undead. He's like, you know what I mean? It's fam, blood, innit? He's a council estate, deep, husky, clipped slang. Now, unless I write that in that way, how is anyone going to know how he speaks? And then you have Reginald, who speaks in full sentences. He's very intelligent. He uses big words and complex sentences. And again, how is that going to come across unless you use the right language and the right tone? Fortunately for me, and this is a blessing, the early Undead was never proofread. And that paid me bloody dividends, because it meant I didn't have proofreaders coming in going, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. So I just went ahead and did it. Later, when I'm working with professional editors and on books, and they're coming in and they're stripping all my dialect out. And I go, no, you can't do that. That sentence is imperfect. And I go, but this dialogue, it's not, you don't have to be grammatically perfect. People don't speak grammatically perfect sentences. They speak how they speak. That's human life. And so there'd be that constant pitch running battle with editors as well, particularly proofreaders. So fight that corner. If you're going through if you're writing a book and you're getting it through professional editing services, particularly if you're working with a publisher, if you're working with a good structural editor and they want to make lots of good changes to make the book better, you've got to compromise, and you've got to compromise a good 80-90% of what they want, because it's the publisher's money that's going to be marketing that book. But I would argue things like the way you portray your characters' voices is vital, especially if you're outside of London and New York. Don't let those middle-class fuckers strip our language away from us. That's wrong. Shouldn't do it. And I speak quite firmly about that because I believe in it. And then others haven't. Then this was the one that got a few people talking. I said, editors love plots, readers love stories. And then a few people went, what the fuck now? What did you just say? What's the difference? And it kind of got, I had a few reactions from that. And I think I went on to say, I can't remember what I went on to say now. I said, remember that you're writing a story, you're not writing a plot. That's a big one, isn't it? It's a bit. How do you explain that? The way I look at this is life isn't a plot. Life is a story. So if you hear something about somebody, John went through this terrible thing. Oh, what happened? What's his story? You're not going to tell me about John's plot. You're not going to tell me what happened to Sally. What's Sally's plot? You're interested in their story. You're interested in what happened to them. The story is our lives. Our lives aren't plots. And I don't think... I think about all the brilliant books I've ever read, and I'm invested in the character, and I'm invested in the whole of the thing. I'm there for the story. I don't give a shit about the plot. The plot's just the thing that is there to get the book from A to B. And what I can't even remember now. This is how little interest I have in plots. I can't even remember the types of plot there are. Go and get something. Got to go somewhere. Achieve something. I don't know. Boy meets girl. Girl meets boy. People meet people. I don't know. It's like stuff like that, where there's an objective to achieve. That's the plot. And when I was writing books, my editors were always coming into me going, the plot's getting slow, the plot's getting boring, get back to the plot. Now let me refer to, I wrote this trilogy in space called the Code series, and it's about Yasmin Emile Defont, who knocks over basically a bank on a spaceship. These are big world ships. Each ship has got like 1 million people on it, and there's like 50 ships in this fleet. So it's a big... They've got massive populations. They're all moving freely between them, and it's representative of how we're living now. And the whole purpose of this series that I wrote was to reflect that even if we're living on ultra modern spaceships in space where we could have everything we could possibly want, we're still going to find reasons to kill and be nasty to each other exactly the same way we are here on Earth, because human behaviour will never change. So that was the whole point of the story. Yasmin knocks over the bank, Fleet Finance offices, intending to steal a crypto code worth like 1 million credits, and she inadvertently steals another code which all the politicians want because it's meant to be leading them somewhere very important, and I won't say what that is because you might read the books and I don't want to spoil the plot for you. And all the way through that trilogy, some of the editors were like, get back to the plot, get back to the plot, get back to the plot. Every scene must be about the plot. Every scene must be about what's happening about that code. And I'm like, no, I disagree. The trilogy is about the story. It's about the characters. It's about the people. It's about the setting. And it's about their interactions with each other. And they're all getting caught up in this other thing that's going on. And I just thought, our lives aren't plots. There's no plot to my life. There's no overarching objective to life, is there? Life is fucking happenstance. And in a way, I've got this kind of nihilistic view of life that it is really quite meaningless, in the sense of we're the ones that impose all the rules on ourselves to do with how we should function in society, how we should get a job, buy furniture, live our lives, pay our mortgages, pay our rent. So we impose all these restrictions on each other. But really, on the grand scheme of things, we're on a planet spinning through space. We're just another organism. And we're the ones that have imposed all this on us. And if you strip back to the bare function of it, there is no plot. There is no reason. Each living creature on the planet has got a duty to try and survive. And that's it. Where's the fucking plot in that? And I just think I don't like it. And I think every time someone walked into my police station to tell me something that had happened, I'm like, what's the story? What happened in that incident? And I guess somebody could argue, well, that's the plot. I don't see it. I've never seen it. I don't like it. And I get the idea that the plot is the thing that drives you forward. But I would argue that if I was to rewrite the Code trilogy, and if I was to remove Yasmin stealing that code, and then put in that it was a cure for a disease, or a new weapon, or a big secret about a politician, it wouldn't fucking matter. It wouldn't change a thing. Everything could still happen in the order it did, and we'd still be as hooked in Yasmin and Sam, and Zhang Wu, and Christy Carter, and Helga, and Abdul the Angry, and Janie, and Sven, and all these other things that are going on. That's the story. And that's what our lives are like, aren't they? Our lives are enriched by the things around us and the encounters that we have and the interactions that we have, the conversations that we have, sometimes meaningless, sometimes meaningful, depending on our emotional connection to them or the emotional connection of others that in writing we translate. And it's not always about the plot. For instance, me making this podcast now, there's no plot to doing this. I'm not doing this to serve a purpose, to gain a thing, to fulfill an objective, to achieve a journey, to overcome an obstacle. I'm just fucking doing it. So where's the plot in this? There isn't. And this might be coming across a little bit clumsy, and other people might be going, I don't get it, I don't get what you're trying to say. And I guess that there might be some confusion in it, but the raw reality is life isn't a plot. And if you're telling a story, tell the fucking story. Don't just hinge on the plot. And that rule that editors seem to try and thrust in every scene must be about the plot is just bollocks. I can't understand about a fish on a wall. There was something about if somebody, I think there was a scene or something like that. If there's some characters in a room and there's like a fish on a wall, they're one of those mounted fish that maybe someone's caught and had stuffed or mounted. If there's a fish on a wall, it's got to be there as a reason for the plot, otherwise don't mention it. I'm like, fucking why not? Maybe it's just interesting for there to be a fish on the wall. Maybe it's just a good thing to describe in the scene, that it's there. Maybe it's towards the characterization of the people that you're talking about. Maybe it's just a looking point. Maybe it can be part of a surreal comedy with two characters looking at a dead fish on a wall thinking, what fucking moron would put a dead fish on a wall? It doesn't serve any purpose to the plot, but it's an interesting concept nonetheless, and I loved that. And when editors go, well, it's not playing any purpose to the plot, remove it. But why would you do that? That's depth, that's characterization. That could be funny, it could be sad, it could mean nothing at all, but that's the reflection of life and the reality that we live in. Sometimes our days mean nothing at all. Sometimes we work for 10 years at jobs that mean nothing at all. And I think to remove all that, and and again, it comes down to the bland editing. The crime thriller, it's got to be about the plot, it's got to be about getting the plot home, and I don't like it. And I made a list, because it got me thinking when I said editors love plots, readers love stories. And I'm just going to read a few of these out. You might know some of them. And if you're seeing this on YouTube or anywhere else, leave in the comments below the stories you love. Not the plots you love, the stories you love, the books you love, the very best books that you love. Let other readers know in the comments. But I remember reading Robin Hobb's Assassin's Apprentice. Now I know that it's something to do, obviously an Assassin's Apprentice tends to give it away, But I remember that there was the main character, and he had everyone was mind bonded to an animal, and he had a wolf called Night Eyes, and I ended up calling Bear my dog Night Eyes because I'd read that book and it had such a strong influence on me. I haven't got a fucking clue what that story was about, other than something to do with an assassin. But I adored those characters. I adored the setting. I adored the language, the world building, the pacing, everything about it. And there were a bunch of scenes. I can't even remember what book it was, where the main character and the wolf are just living in a hut, and they're going out fishing and gardening and going to the shops in this fantasy land. I'm like, I'm in for this. If this is all they ever do, I'm in for this. I'll read this to forever and ever and ever and ever and ever, because I just love it. And there was something about it. It was captivating and compelling, and there was no fucking plot there whatsoever. And it was beautifully wonderful. And Robin Hobb, was a female author, sold a shit ton of those books, and deservedly so. I don't give a toss about the plot. I don't care what the plot was. I was hooked on the story. Discworld, all the Discworld stories. The plots were nuts. There's Sam Vimes, who was probably one of my favourite fictional characters ever. And actually, when I played Xbox, I always used Sam Vimes as my gamer tag. Rincewind, and the luggage with all the feet, and Corporal Carrot, and Aguila, or is it Aguila? Anguilla, I can't remember, the werewolf lady, there's a police officer, and all the other characters. I give a shit about what the plot is. No one cares about the plot. You're just reading it because you've got this wonderful world that's been built, and these wonderful characters, and these wonderful settings, and it's funny, and it's moving, and Terry Pratchett just bloody created this beautiful thing, and it was just so compelling and amazing, and it's magical. It gives a shit about the plot. And of course there's plots in there about, I don't know, the cop ones to do with Sam Vimes, about people being assassinated and trying to stop wars and stuff like that. But really, you're just there to see how all the characters move around in this world. Dark Tower, Roland Deschain and Eddie, and the massive, long, sprawling story by Stephen King that went on for like a bazillion books, and each book got thicker and thicker and thicker and thicker. And there was, enormous backstories, which I normally hate, but it was pivotal to his story, and it formed the basis of how he formed his story. And you go, I'm in. I don't care. I don't care about your plot. I don't care if these people ever meet the bad guy or whatever. I just want to keep reading and reading and reading and reading, because I'm compelled by the characters. I'm driven by the characters and their settings and their everyday living. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, Arthur Dent, same thing. His planet blown up, and there's some kind of plot about the planet and what's he going to do now, but we're just in it for the ride. Patrick Rothfuss, The Kingkiller Chronicles. He was meant to be, look up Patrick Rothfuss, he was meant to do 3 books, he only ever did 2. The first 2 are probably the best fantasy books I've ever read. And then I don't know what happened, but he just didn't do the 3rd book. I don't know why, he just didn't. But they're brilliant. And again, you're just hooked into the characterization, the story, the setting, the pace, the world building. The plot comes last. And then I think about the series I've read, Sharp, Biggles, Flashman, Hornblower, all those series, and each one had to have a plot to drive that particular novel forward, but the plot is secondary to the story. And you're there for the story, the characters, the interaction, the world building, all those things that are going on. Each plot is just a reason for that book to be in there. Even in The Undead, the story is about Howie and Dave and that group of people, and how only by forming cooperative groups can we achieve the things that we need to do. That's what the story is. You could take the zombies away and put werewolves in. You could take the werewolves out and put vampires in. You could take them all out and make it about a nuclear war. Take them all out, make it about something else. That's the whole point of it is what they do in their day-to-day lives, the decisions they make, the personal sacrifices they do. That's the story, not the plot. There are exceptions, of course. I can only think of 2 off the top of my head before I sat down and made this. Ready Player One is a science fiction book, and it's one of the very few where the plot and the story are one and the same. The 2 are so equally and beautifully entwined. It's very rare for an author to create such magic. And I would argue, respectfully, and with the greatest love in the world for the author, because it was an incredible book, I think it was Ernest Cline. I don't think even that author has achieved that level again, because it was about 80s gaming effectively, and then a character trying to navigate this world of gaming in order to achieve the plot. But the 2 were so intricately woven that you were compelled by the plot and driven by the story as much as you were compelled by the story and driven by the plot. The whole thing was just so beautifully crafted that it's such a rarity. And if you'd have taken either side of that away, the whole thing would have fallen down. Whereas that's not the case with some other things. With Robin Hobbs, for instance, you could have changed that plot out and put any plot in it. I'd still be reading about the character and the wolf. Same with Discworld, same with Dark Tower, same with Hitchhikers and all these other stories. You'd still be reading about the characters in whatever setting they were in, because the author's ability to create the characters and story and the world and the pace and the humour and the tragedy is so good. I don't give a shit about the plot. I don't care what the fucking plot is. Another one, Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. That is one of the most poetic books I've ever read. It is meant to be like a steampunky thing. If you haven't read it, give it a try. Senlin Ascends by Josiah Bancroft. It's just amazing. It's an incredible story. And again, the plot's there, driving the story along. Husband and wife split up. She goes missing. He has to find her. That's it. But it's about what he does in his journey to get there. And again, you could replace that plot. You could take out the reason for him undertaking this journey. You could give it any reason in the world, and he's still got to undertake the journey. The journey is the story. It's not the plot. We're not there for the plot. We're there for what happens in between. Da Vinci Code, that's always a good one. But again, that's an anomaly. So I think Dan Brown probably develops his plots first. That's a plot writer. And they're very intricate. And then everything else is woven in around the plot after. So again, if you took the plot away from Da Vinci Code, it probably wouldn't work because the plot is the thing that drives those. But then in that regard, then you could almost say the plot becomes a secondary character. Because the plot is so compelling, because it's so crafted, the plot has got as much depth as you'd give a character. So maybe there's an argument that the plot then almost becomes a character on its own. And I'm sure there's some fucking brainy, wordy editor people out there that are going to come up and go, yes, the Diogenesis of characterization. I don't fucking care. The whole point, and my point stands, editors love plots, readers love stories. We don't pick up a book for the thrilling plot, we pick it up because we care about the characters that we're reading. We want bad things to happen to bad people, we want good things to happen to good people. We want to cheer for the animals that live, we want to go, yeah, it's amazing. We want to read about future technologies and exciting chases, and we want to read about love and romance and passion and hatred and tragedy and disaster and triumph. Gives a shit. No one gives a shit about plot. Plot's boring. Stories are exciting. That was my point. That's 32 minutes and 53 seconds of me going, bollocks. All the editors in the world are wrong. I'm right. Fuck you. But there we go. So that's what I meant by those 7 tips. And that's a little bit of extra depth as to my thought processes. But remember, there's no rules about writing. You don't have to listen to anything I say. You can go away and form your own opinions and form your own stories. And that's the best thing you can do. Form your own opinions. Form your own stories. Break every rule there is. Realise that some of those rules are probably good rules. Put them back in and keep learning and keep growing and keep developing and keep doing it until you're somewhere achieving, somewhere where you want to be. And even now, I've written 40 books. 25 of them have been Kindle bestsellers. I've sold millions of stories. I'm achieving #1 bestsellers. I'm getting recognised in the industry. A lot of that's been done by my self-publishing efforts on my own. I'm massively proud of that. But, every paragraph I write is still practice for the paragraph that comes after. Oh, that's so cringy! But it's fucking true. And it is true. And if you ever lose that, then don't bother writing. And I would go all the way back to the very beginning and suggest, politely, respectfully, that some of those books on those shiny plinths in Waterstones and Smiths and wherever, chain bookstores in the UK and America, some of those writers aren't doing that. They're just putting some shit together with ghostwriters. A lot of them are using fucking ghostwriters. I know a ghostwriter that's doing that, and he writes a lot of those books with those people. And they're pumping them out with their name on the book, and they don't give a shit because they're banking the royalties and they don't care, and they fucking sold out. But that's a different story. Anyway, so there we go. That's my extra long not a podcast on 7 top tip ranty, rambly, moany about publishing industry and editors. I'm not attacking editors. I love Ian, my structured editor. He's fantastic. Quick example. It's 35 minutes, so I'm very conscious that I don't want to talk too long. World Chip Humility, which was book 1 of that code stories I was telling you about. I started writing that, and I started at my point here. Now, the book later opens up with Yasmin Emile Defont committing a shoplifting in a shop. But that scene was about halfway through my original version. Now, I sent my original version to my awesome, beautiful, wonderful editor, Ian. And he went, read the whole thing, and he does a reader's report on it. And he comes back to me and said, I suggest these changes. And one of those changes were this scene with Yasmin, shoplifting. That's the opening of the story. And I just kind of went, oh, and he was absolutely right. And it was. And I restructured the whole bloody thing, and it took weeks of work. But it was just perfect. That's a structure editor. And Ian does that all the time with me. He says, this would work better if you considered this. I trust this guy complicitly. 99% of things he says, I go, okay, I'll do that because that's a brilliant idea. But equally, when I say no, he's respectful of the fact that it's my name, my book. And ultimately, I don't have to do what they want. And an editor just goes, a good editor, it's a suggestion. This may help you better. Have you thought about this? And never do what I tell you to do because you're a shit. And I've had that many times, and it's not nice. So there we go. I'm going to go because it's Friday. It's pissing down with rain, so I don't know if I'll do any exercise. I might just go and eat some takeaway and have Thai sweet chili crisps with Deli, who is now fast asleep on the sofa. I think you can see her. And then I'm going to have a beer. So I hope those tips have helped you. Anything you want to ask me, leave them in the comments. If I can, I'll reply. Much love. Have a nice weekend.